Picture this. Millions of American families gathered around their television sets every week, watching the perfect mother serve dinner with a smile. Harriet Nelson seemed to have it all figured out. She never raised her voice, never had a hair out of place, and always knew exactly what to say. But what if I told you that the woman who taught America about family values was living a completely different life when the camera stopped rolling? What if I told you that this sweet, innocent TV mom had actually grown up in the wildest, most dangerous nightclubs in New York? That she told dirty jokes at parties, secretly smoked cigarettes, and hung out with people that 1950 society would never accept? The real Harriet Nelson was nothing like the character she played on television, and her true story is so shocking that it would have ended her career if anyone had found out. Today, we're going to uncover the incredible double life of Harriet Nelson, and trust me, you're going to see this beloved TV icon in a completely different light by the end of this video. Let me start with something that will blow your mind. Harriet Nelson was performing on stage before she could even hold her head up. I'm not kidding. When she was born as Peggy Lou Snyder in July 1909, her parents were traveling actors. And at just 6 weeks old, they put their tiny baby daughter into their show as part of the actual performance. Newspapers even wrote about it. Can you imagine? Most babies that age can barely focus their eyes. But Harriet was already in show business. This wasn't some cute family photo opportunity. This was real theater with real audiences, and little Harriet was right there in the middle of it all. By the time she was 3 years old, she was speaking actual lines on stage. While other kids were learning to tie their shoes, Harriet was memorizing scripts and performing in front of strangers night after night. Her childhood was nothing like what most kids experienced. Her parents ran a stock theater company, which meant they performed a different play every single night. Think about that for a second. These weren't well-rehearsed shows that had been practiced for months. They would learn a new play during the day and perform it that same night. And little Harriet had to keep up with all the adult actors around her. But here's where things get really interesting. When Harriet was just 16 years old, her parents got divorced. This completely shattered her world. She had to choose between living with her mother or her father, between having a stable home or chasing her dreams in theater. And you know what she did? She chose to become independent. At 16, she decided she didn't need anyone else to make her dreams come true. Just 3 months before she was supposed to graduate from high school, Harriet made a decision that shocked everyone. She dropped out of school to join a ballet company at the Capitol Theater. Most people thought she was crazy. Here was a smart girl who was about to get her diploma, and she threw it all away for dancing. But Harriet knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't interested in playing it safe. She wanted to perform, and she was willing to risk everything for it. This decision led her to one of the most famous and dangerous places in all of New York City, the Cotton Club in Harlem. Now, if you don't know about the Cotton Club, let me paint you a picture. This was the late 1920s, and the Cotton Club was where all the biggest jazz musicians played. We're talking about legends like Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong. But here's the twisted part. Even though the club was in the heart of Black Harlem and featured amazing black performers, only white customers were allowed inside. And it wasn't just any white customers. The Cotton Club was run by the mob. Gangsters like Lucky Luciano and Dutch Schultz hung out there every night. These were seriously dangerous men who controlled illegal activities all over the city. And there was young Harriet, probably still a teenager, dancing and performing right in front of them night after night. Can you imagine how terrifying that must have been? Here's this girl who grew up in traveling theater companies, and suddenly she's performing for some of the most dangerous criminals in America. But Harriet didn't back down. She learned how to handle herself in that world. She discovered that show business wasn't all glitter and glamour. Sometimes it was dark and scary, but she was tough enough to survive it. But the Cotton Club gave Harriet more than just experience with dangerous people. It's also where she picked up a habit that would follow her for the rest of her life. At just 13 years old, she started smoking cigarettes. Back then, smoking was considered glamorous, especially for performers. It made you look older and more sophisticated. But what seemed cool as a teenager would eventually destroy her health decades later. While she was performing at the Cotton Club, Harriet was also working hard in vaudeville shows all over the country. For those who don't know, vaudeville was like variety television before television existed. Each show had singers, dancers, comedians, and all kinds of different acts. Harriet often worked as what they called a straight woman for famous comedians like Ken Murray and Burt Lahr, who later played the Cowardly Lion in The Wizard of Oz. Being a straight woman meant that she didn't get to tell the jokes, but she set them up perfectly so the comedians could get big laughs. This kind of work required perfect timing and incredible skill. You had to know exactly when to speak, how to react, and how to make the other person look funny without trying to steal their spotlight. Harriet was brilliant at it. The biggest achievement of her vaudeville career was performing at the Palace Theater in New York City. This was the most important theater for vaudeville performers. If you played at the Palace, it meant you had really made it in show business. And Harriet didn't just perform there once. She performed there 4 different times in the 1930s. That was almost unheard of. The Palace Theater was picky about who they brought back, but audiences loved Harriet so much that they kept inviting her to return. But success in show business didn't protect Harriet from making terrible mistakes in her personal life. When she was just 21 years old, she married a comedian named Roy Sedley. This was one of the worst decisions she ever made. Sedley was 9 years older than her, and he had serious problems with drinking and violence. They had met at the Cotton Club, which should have been a red flag right there. Sedley was part of that wild, dangerous nightclub scene, and he brought all that chaos into their marriage. He was emotionally and verbally abusive to Harriet. He had a terrible temper and surrounded himself with other hard-living show business people who only made things worse. The marriage was a nightmare. Harriet, who had been independent and strong since she was a teenager, found herself trapped with a man who treated her horribly. The bright lights and excitement of the Cotton Club turned into something dark and frightening at home. Sedley's drinking and violent behavior made Harriet's life miserable. After just 1 year, Harriet couldn't take it anymore and left him. But getting divorced wasn't easy in those days. The legal process took 2 more painful years. From 1931 to 1933, Harriet was separated from Sedley, but still legally married to him. She had to keep working and performing while dealing with this mess in her personal life. She took any job she could get, always smiling on stage while her private life was falling apart. Finally, in 1933, the marriage was officially annulled. Harriet was free, but the experience had changed her. She had learned what kind of man to avoid, and she was much more careful about who she trusted with her heart. That same year, something wonderful happened. In 1932, while she was still dealing with her divorce, Harriet met a saxophone player named Ozzie Nelson. He was everything that Roy Sedley wasn't. Ozzie was calm, intelligent, and kind. He treated Harriet with respect and made her feel safe for the first time in years. But their relationship caused a scandal. Remember, Harriet was still technically married to Roy Sedley when she met Ozzie. In the 1930s, this was considered very inappropriate. People gossiped about them constantly, but Harriet didn't care what anyone thought. After everything she had been through with Sedley, she had found someone who truly cared about her, and she wasn't going to give that up because of what other people might say. Ozzie hired Harriet to be the singer in his band, and she took a new stage name, Harriet Hilliard. This was her way of leaving her painful past behind and starting fresh. Most female singers in big bands just stood in the background and sang pretty songs. But Harriet was different. She had personality, energy, and incredible timing from all her years in vaudeville. She didn't just sing, she entertained. She joked around with Ozzie on stage, teased the audience, and made everyone feel like they were part of the show. This was pretty unusual for the 1930s. Most women performers were expected to be quiet and polite, but Harriet was bold and funny, and audiences absolutely loved it. Ozzie started writing special comedy songs just for Harriet, where she got to deliver the punchlines instead of him. In one of their most popular songs, Harriet actually made fun of Ozzie right there on stage, and the crowd went wild. This was revolutionary for the time. Women weren't supposed to talk back or be sassy, but Harriet did it naturally and made it look easy. In 1935, Harriet and Ozzie got married, and this time was completely different from her first marriage. There were no secrets, no abuse, no chaos. They were two people who understood each other and wanted to build a life together based on love and trust. Their marriage wasn't just romantic. It was also a business partnership that would make them both famous. The next year, in 1936, Harriet got her big break in Hollywood. She signed a contract with RKO Radio Pictures, one of the biggest movie studios in the world. This was the same studio that made movies with stars like Katharine Hepburn and Fred Astaire. The contract guaranteed her 3 films, with the possibility of more if she was successful. Her first major movie role was in Follow the Fleet, starring Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. This wasn't some small part. Harriet played a romantic lead opposite Randolph Scott. The movie was a huge hit, making over $3 million, which was an enormous amount of money in 1936. Critics praised Harriet's performance, and audiences loved her voice and natural charm on screen. Suddenly, Harriet Nelson wasn't just a band singer anymore. She was a legitimate movie star. Over the next few years, she appeared in more than a dozen films. She worked with famous actors like Fred MacMurray and proved that she could handle comedy, drama, music, and romance equally well. But here's where Harriet's story takes a surprising turn. Just when her movie career was really taking off, she made a decision that shocked Hollywood. She chose to put her family first instead of chasing bigger and bigger movie roles. This wasn't because anyone forced her to quit. According to Ozzy's autobiography, both he and Harriet truly wanted her to keep acting. She had the talent and the momentum to become one of Hollywood's biggest stars. But they also wanted to have children and build a strong family together. So Harriet made the incredibly difficult choice to step back from movies. She watched as other actresses she worked with, like Rita Hayworth and Judy Garland, became huge international stars. Harriet always wondered what might have been if she had made different choices, and that feeling of missing out never completely went away. In 1944, everything changed again when Red Skelton got drafted into the military. Ozzy saw an opportunity and created a radio show called The Adventures of Ozzy and Harriet, based entirely on their real family life. The show premiered on October 8, 1944, and it was an immediate hit. At first, actors played their sons David and Ricky because the boys were still too young to perform. But eventually, the real Nelson children joined the show. This wasn't just entertainment. It was a family business. With major sponsors like Heinz and Listerine supporting the show, The Adventures of Ozzy and Harriet ran for 402 episodes on radio. By 1952, the family was ready to make the jump to television. ABC had already included an option for television in their contract, and they decided to take it. What happened next made television history. The Adventures of Ozzy and Harriet became the longest-running live-action family sitcom of its time, running for 14 years from 1952 to 1966. Television audiences got to watch David and Ricky Nelson grow up in real time. They saw the boys graduate from high school, go to college, get married, and start their own families. Even their real wives joined the cast when they got married. This had never been done before on television. To make the show feel even more real, Ozzy had their actual house recreated down to every tiny detail on a studio soundstage. The exterior of their real home was shown in the opening credits, and the interior set matched their house perfectly. Harriet even helped design the set to make sure it felt authentic. Viewers felt like they were actually visiting the Nelson family in their own home. At its peak, the show attracted 20 million viewers every week. Harriet Nelson had transformed from a movie star into the face of the perfect American suburban mother. She was calm, classy, and always in control. Millions of people believed that what they saw on television was exactly who she really was in private. But that's where the real story gets interesting. The Harriet Nelson that America fell in love with on television was actually a carefully crafted character. The real Harriet was still the bold, funny, risk-taking woman who had grown up in vaudeville and performed at the Cotton Club. According to Emmy-winning director Peter Jones, who worked with Harriet, she was actually what he called a bombshell, not just because of her looks, but because of her incredible energy and personality. Jones said that Harriet loved people who didn't fit into society's neat little boxes. In the 1950s, when most of America ignored or rejected LGBTQ people, Harriet welcomed them into her private life. She kept this quiet because it would have been scandalous at the time, but she genuinely cared about people that others rejected. The real Harriet also loved telling off-color jokes, the kind of humor you definitely wouldn't hear on family television. And at night, after filming was done, she enjoyed having cocktails with friends. This was the same woman who had grown up around mobsters at the Cotton Club and learned to handle herself in the wildest nightclubs in New York. So while America saw her as the perfect housewife who never said anything inappropriate, the real Harriet was still sharp, sassy, and unafraid to speak her mind. She had simply learned to act like someone completely different for the sake of the television show. This double life continued for over a decade. Harriet became so good at playing the ideal suburban mother that even people who worked with her sometimes forgot about her wild past. She had essentially become a master actress, convincing an entire nation that she was someone she really wasn't. But all of this changed dramatically in 1975 when Ozzie died of liver cancer at age 69. Losing her husband didn't just break Harriet's heart. It shattered the foundation of her entire life. The television show had ended years earlier, but Ozzie had still been the center of everything for Harriet. After his death, Harriet completely withdrew from public life. She stopped going to events, turned down interviews, and rarely left her house. Friends said she was like a completely different person. The vibrant, energetic woman who had charmed audiences for decades seemed to disappear overnight. According to her biographer Michael Carroll, Harriet never really recovered from losing Ozzie. Years later, in the early 1990s, her son Dave was asked how his mother was doing. He was brutally honest. She hasn't been in good spirits since Dad died. This was nearly 20 years after Ozzie's passing, and Harriet still hadn't found a way to move forward. The woman who had once symbolized cheerful American motherhood had become almost unrecognizable. She spent her time with just a few close friends and rarely left her Laguna Beach home. The house that had once been full of parties, laughter, and music became quiet and lonely. Then, on December 31st, 1985, tragedy struck again. Harriet's youngest son, Ricky, died in a plane crash near DeKalb, Texas. He was only 45 years old. Ricky had been a teen idol and successful musician, and his sudden death devastated Harriet even more. She had already lost her husband, and now she had lost one of her children. Harriet became even more reclusive after Ricky's death. She didn't give any interviews about the crash or appear on television to talk about her grief. People close to her said she was completely broken and had nothing left to say to the world. But Harriet was also battling another enemy that had been slowly destroying her health for decades. Remember that smoking habit she picked up when she was just 13 years old at the Cotton Club? She had never quit, and she kept it secret because it didn't fit with her image as the perfect TV mom. Over the years, all that smoking had severely damaged her lungs. She developed emphysema, which made breathing extremely difficult. The woman who had once danced across vaudeville stages could barely walk across a room without getting out of breath. Even knowing how sick it was making her, she continued smoking in private. By the 1990s, Harriet's health had become so bad that she rarely left her Laguna Beach home. The house had beautiful ocean views and had once been filled with friends and family. Now it was just Harriet, alone with her memories and her declining health. Harriet Nelson passed away quietly on October 2nd, 1994, at the age of 85. She died in her sleep at home from congestive heart failure, which is a common condition in elderly people where the heart becomes too weak to pump blood properly. Her death wasn't dramatic or tragic. It was peaceful, which seemed fitting for someone who had spent so many years trying to project calm and stability. The most touching part of her final moments was that her son David was there with her. He held her hand as she took her last breaths. After losing Ozzie and Ricky, David was the last family member left, and he made sure his mother didn't die alone. She wasn't in a cold hospital surrounded by strangers. She was at home with someone who loved her. After her death, Harriet was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in the Hollywood Hills, right next to Ozzie and Ricky. This cemetery is where many Hollywood legends are buried, including Walt Disney and Lucille Ball. But for the Nelson family, being together was more important than any famous neighbors. When the news of Harriet's death was announced, newspapers called her the ideal TV mom, and they weren't wrong. For 14 years, she had shown America what a perfect family could look like. But the real story, The story of a girl who started performing at 6 weeks old, who danced for mobsters, who survived an abusive marriage, who gave up movie stardom for her family, and who spent her final years grieving alone, was so much more complex and interesting than anything television ever showed. Harriet Nelson lived two completely different lives. There was the public Harriet, who represented everything wholesome and pure about American family values. And there was the private Harriet, who had grown up in the rough world of show business, who wasn't afraid to speak her mind, and who cared about people that society rejected. The fact that she was able to keep these two sides of herself separate for so many years shows just how talented an actress she really was. She didn't just play a character on television. She created an entirely different identity and convinced an entire nation that it was real. Looking back at Harriet Nelson's incredible life, you can see how much she sacrificed for her family and her career. She gave up what could have been a huge movie career to focus on raising her children. She hid her true personality for decades to maintain an image that America needed during the uncertain years after World War II. But perhaps most importantly, her story shows us that the people we see on television or in movies are often very different from who they really are in private. Harriet Nelson was so much more interesting, complex, and human than the perfect character she played on TV. Her legacy isn't just about being a great television mother. It's about being a survivor who started working before she could walk, who overcame abuse and tragedy, who made difficult choices about career and family, and who kept parts of herself hidden to protect the people she loved. The next time you watch an old episode of The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, remember that you're not just seeing a sweet housewife serving dinner. You're seeing one of the most skilled actresses in television history, someone who could make you believe she was someone completely different from who she really was. Harriet Nelson's double life reminds us that everyone has hidden depths, secret struggles, and private joys that the world never sees. She may have seemed perfect on television, but her real story, with all its darkness and complexity, is so much more fascinating than any scripted show could ever be. What do you think about Harriet Nelson's incredible double life? Were you shocked to learn about her wild past and hidden struggles? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this amazing woman who fooled an entire nation for over a decade. If you enjoyed learning about the real Harriet Nelson, make sure to hit that like button and share this video with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories about the hidden lives of your favorite classic TV stars. Trust me, there are so many more shocking secrets waiting to be uncovered, and you won't want to miss a single one.